So from here on out, we're going to switch from kind of the last generation of website design, the two-column layout, to something much more flexible and much more modern, and that is what is known as responsive web design. Now, it's something we've been pointing to, pretty much throughout the course, but today we're finally going to get an opportunity to actually produce a little bit of flexibility here for ourselves. So, what is responsive design? So, I have open here, for the 4 millionth time, I'm sure, The Verge. As you can tell, I am in Chrome browser. I am, not that it matters, but on a Mac. And this particular browser viewport is taking up the entire width of the screen. So what I am seeing is the desktop version here of The Verge. So things like we've already talked about, we've got kind of these long marquee containers. We've got these short marquee containers. If we scroll down a little bit, we've got this block here of links, and that really kind of takes us out to our content, etc. The challenge of modern website design is that your job as the web developer is to develop pages that look as though they are always and have always been meant exactly for the kind of device that your user is coming to you from. So that means if a user has a 10-year-old MacBook Pro like this is, it should look like it was built for my MacBook Pro. That means if I have a new top of the line 5K iMac, it should look as though it was built for me. That also means that if I have an iPhone or an Android device or a connected device like a connected refrigerator, yes, they really do make those things. If I have a web browsing portal in an entertainment system that's in a high-end car, yes, they really have those things. The challenge for the developer is to make it look as though that particular website was always meant with that weird, peculiar device in mind. So if I take and shorten up this window, sooner or later what we'll see is I'm using up more of that browser viewport width, and sooner or later, right about here, what we'll see is we get, if I scroll up a little bit, we'll see a little bit of a change in the way that this page is displayed. We still have the 2x2 side-by-side containers here, but everything is just a little bit smaller than it was. It's a few dozen pixels shorter. It's a few dozen pixels narrower. As I scroll down, you'll notice that I don't have anywhere near as much white space here as I did before. These content areas along the left-hand side are pushed all the way to the left here in the tablet version of the page. So this would be like how an iPad or an Android tablet or an HDX Amazon Kindle Fire would see it. Not the same way that if I keep going out and out and out, not the same way that my desktop browser would see it. And if I keep going in and in and in, I get another change here again. And okay, maybe I don't. We'll go just a little further. There we go. Now I get another change again. And this would be the smartphone version of the page. This would be something that I would see on an iPhone or a Galaxy phone, etc. The challenge for you as a web developer is to always make it seem as though the whatever strange device it is that came here to your web resource, it was always the intention for your weird device to come here to our web resource. And actually, it's not as difficult as it would seem. And actually, it's much more simple than what the previous version to this was. As few as 5 and 10 years ago, actually as recently as summer of 2017, we still had websites that used the M or the T as the prefix to their URL. So The Verge would have m.theverge.com for mobile. The Verge would have t.theverge.com for tablet. Yahoo did this. Google did this. As a matter of fact, as late as summer 2017, Cars.com was doing this. They had a mobile version for both um, phones and tablets, and then a full desktop version, and they still actually had the m.cars.com separator. Really, that's a terrible nomenclature to use. The problem with that is you have to develop 3 separate web pages all the time. So if I make a contextual change here to my homepage on The Verge, whatever that might be, what ends up being my responsibility then is to go chase after m.theverge.com and t.theverge.com to make those identical changes. And that's a huge redoubling of your effort. It's actually 3 times as much. Responsive design says, hey, if we set up the groundwork first, a user is going to come with a peculiar device, and that's okay. That device is going to self-nominate what way it is that the content for our pages is going to be displayed. And that's the very next thing we're going to see here is what can we do in very, very short order to make our pages respond. So if we go back to RVC Eagle and go to the modules section, we're going to have to scroll down to session 5. What we want is the mobile test.html. What I have, it's open here in the background for me. Go ahead and grab a copy here of the actual HTML file. What we want to do is take a look at this in brackets to see what it is that's going on so that we can actually deploy this moving forward. While you go ahead and download that and get it open, I'm just going to describe our way through it. It is a very, very simple HTML document. It's in the order of, with white space, 40 total lines. What this particular website does, it is right in here in between that open preview window here in RVC. As you take and move the browser window, shut, you can see that the block of color changes. So from teal to red, and as I keep going, sooner or later it's going to turn black. The other thing you'll notice is the wrapper keeps getting smaller. So here, at the smallest available size, my wrapper is largest. I know that seems backwards, but it's actually a fairly standard practice. The larger your browser viewport is, the smaller the percentage is for the wrapper. The reason for that is what you want to do is draw your user's attention to the center of the page where you have kind of a density of content. You really don't need to do that when you're, let's say here with the black box we have here would represent something like a mobile device. Look, there's not a lot of real estate there, right? I mean, it's something the palm of your hand in size. So you really don't need to waste a lot of space in order to draw your user's attention someplace. There's not a lot of space. As I go a little bit larger, for the tablet's a little bit larger. So in some cases, we do have a little bit of screen real estate to be able to burn, but really we don't want to burn a ton of it. Whereas when we keep going to our largest browser viewport width, we've got tons of available real estate. So let's force the user to draw inward and concentrate where our content areas really are. So if we come back over and finally open up everything in brackets, we'll see that we have just a really simple window here. It is 30 lines of text. In the style section, again, this is terrible design. It's just instructive design. So do as I say, not as I do. Never do it this way in real life. We have essentially the only bit of style that's going to be reused again and again is box 1. We are giving box 1 a starting background color of aqua. We're using 50%. That's line number 6 here. We're using 50% of the available screen real estate. Again, I have to give this particular container a height, because if I don't, and I don't have any content in there, really it's only taking up one dimension of the two-dimensional space we're giving it, and you can't see it. Here on line number 8, because I want the content to be centered, I want to give the margin auto. I could also go margin left auto, margin right auto, and that'll push the content to the center of the screen. Or this is the shorthand version. I only have to say margin auto one time. That's not particularly interesting. There's nothing really fantastic going on here. So the real magic here is what is known as the media query. So we have two media queries here. One of them is on line 10, and the other one is on line 17. A media query is essentially a way for the browser to determine what happens under certain conditions for how large the browser viewport is. So there's something here to consider, is our original style section. So everything we've been doing to date, whether or not it is here in the forbidden internal embedded rather style section inside of an HTML page, or whether or not this is everything we've been doing to date over in our CSS pages. So if you think about your midterm, if you think about your case studies, the Path of Light Yoga Studio or the Pacific Trails Resort, really everything inside of there is under what is known as the standard viewport width. That's 1 EM or 100%, or desktop, really, if you think about it. Next, what we have here on line number 12 is, I guess I've added a couple of extra lines for you. On line number 12 here, we have at media only screen and then in parentheses, max width 64 EM. That's where all of the kind of the magic is happening of the media query. What this is saying is, at a maximum width of 64 EM, so anything under that, act in a certain way. So if we come over here to mobile test, and again, I'm just in brackets, and this is my live preview. If I pull that browser viewport shorter, so this is 1 EM all the way over here. As I keep going smaller, sooner or later, I'm going to get to a point where it's 63.99 EM. So if I keep going, that means it's roughly speaking smaller than one standard. I think we have to refresh this page. It is smaller here than one standard browser viewport width. There we go. And boom, it turns over to my red background. You'll notice that that's one of the changes I have here. I've changed inside of this media query, again from lines 12 down to 17. The only changes I've made here are background color is dark red, and width, instead of 50%, I have 80%. Remember, so it's backwards. The wider the browser viewport, the shorter the width of your wrapper. The smaller your viewport, the wider your wrapper is. So those are the two changes I've made, and I can see those manifest here. I'm taking up a lot more of my browser viewport than I am right here. And instead of teal, the background color there is dark red. A little tool I have for you here is mqtest.io. That's mediaquerytest.io. And what this is doing is it's actually just using the built-in browser statistics to tell you what's going on. So right here, the very first line is this device responds to a width of 63.75 EM. So that is underneath that 64 EM threshold right here. And that's why it changes the background color and it changes the width of my viewport. Something else to notice is if I keep expanding this window, and if you just look at that width, you'll notice it's changing. Right about, I don't know, here-ish, we have 1 EM. That is actually the standard built into the browser. So I'm using Chrome here, and Chrome, as a piece of software, says, look, I am one EM, so one browser viewport width at standard desktop length, or width rather, at 1600 pixels. So that's what Chrome thinks is one EM. The difference here is going to be if I was running this in Firefox, I would get a different 1 EM width. So it might not be 1600 pixels. When I ran this with Safari, which is busy downloading now, or I would be happy to go switch it over for you. When I ran this with Safari, because Safari is actually built to run with my system, Safari knows how wide my browser is supposed to be. So it actually conforms to one total width here. So the device width was much wider in Safari than it was in Chrome, because Safari is built specifically to work with my device. So that's something potentially we would see as a change. Here again, we've got the smartphone media query. So it's that exact same line. I will tell you that I do not memorize the at media only screen and max width colon however many EM. That's something I copy and paste from one project into another. There is only so much bandwidth the human brain has. I would prefer to remember student names, where I parked my car, and how to get home than I would remember how that one particular line looks. But I can tell you, despite my having said that whole paragraph right there, that some amongst you are going to try and choose to copy or type rather than copy this line every time, and that's actually going to be one of the biggest mistakes I see here for chapter 8 is the media query lines are actually going to be wrong. Here on line 19, you'll see the only two changes I have made are background color is black and width is 100%. But you'll notice as I pull that browser viewport close, this has not forgotten. The rules from the previous media queries still apply here. So because I had a height of 400 pixels and margins auto, that is maintaining itself here in my smartphone media query, even though I never specifically designed it to do so. So that's one of these fantastic things about the way the media query is built into CSS. Number one, your browser takes care of it for you. I don't really have to set aside a whole bunch of processing power for the browser to figure out, you know, how big, how wide are you, what kind of browser are you. It's going to figure that out for you and do most of the heavy lifting for you. Once I create a rule, this is the second good thing about media queries, is once I create a rule, that rule is going to be pushed down and broadcast from my desktop, that's up here, to my tablet media query, that's down here, to my smartphone media query, that's down here. The only time a rule changes is when you specify it to change. So here for box 1, that's my selector, box 1. The property I want changed, or the properties rather that I want changed, are only background color and width. So because I do not specify height and margin, they won't change for me. So we're going to build on this example. We're going to build a better website with this. But this really is how other websites are made. As I pull the viewport shut here on the Verge, you'll notice that my font family choices are still the same. You'll notice that as this grows larger, you'll notice that the hover colors are still the same. You'll notice that the background colors are still the same. You'll actually notice that the advertising here is still the same. It's just that the location of that advertisement changes right there. So that is a huge benefit to you. We are no longer creating 3 different websites. We are making a set of rules that applies from desktop to tablet to smartphone, down, and we only have to specifically name the rules we want to change to make a really substantial change in the way it is that our web page is going to look.